Hello, everyone. Welcome to the No Place But Home, the podcast and video series of the Intelligent Community Forum. I'm Lou Zaccarella, one of the founders of the Intelligent Community Forum. Today, we conclude our series on social innovation and the impact of COVID-19 on communities worldwide. This episode is brought to you by the ICF Institute in Dublin, Ohio, host of the annual Intelligent Community Forum Conference and Awards on October 21st. In our past two shows, we talked about the spiritual and emotional crisis caused by the pandemic and what the impact has been on the anchors of human life, hope, faith, and work. We then asked thought leaders in our next episode in the area of social innovation what a near-term innovation vaccine, we called it, might look like to keep communities in balance during this new abnormal. Well, today we're going to examine the role of the technology that has literally kept billions of us stitched together, intact, and communicating. So we call today's segment The Network. Clever, right? We will focus on the broadband network, the civic software processes, and ask whether technologies like the cloud-based network and satellites and satellite broadband might actually repair the social index in some way. And I know that's a lot to ask, but I can't think of two people better to tackle this issue than TJ Costello and Kevin Cohen. TJ is Cisco's Global Director for Smart Cities and IoT. He works with leaders in cities, governments, and transportation organizations around the world to identify strategies and solutions to operational challenges and to leverage the digital infrastructure. Kevin, for those of you who listen to my Better Satellite World podcast, know he is the general manager of Viasat's groundbreaking global community internet business. Now, he's responsible for new business models that have brought affordable broadband to unserved and underserved communities across emerging markets. Viasat has brought satellite-enabled community Wi-Fi to the unconnected, living and working in Mexico. So today, Viasat's community internet reaches hundreds of thousands of Mexican cities in a transformative way. So we want to talk about transformation today, and that's why I've brought TJ and Kevin together. Guys, welcome. Thanks for coming on to No Place But Home.
Thanks for having us, Lou.
Let's get right into it. As a result of the pandemic and issues around governance and education and economy, the network has become a visible and essential key to social and economic stability, more so than at any time that I can remember. First of all, do you guys both agree with that? Kevin, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, connectivity is become even more critical to making sure that, industries continue to move forward, with all the working from home, working from your local community. The ability to have access to broadband is absolutely key, so that people are able to stay within their communities and lock down, if you will. What we've seen in the past with that and communities that we're connecting, and this is happening all over the world, is that by being stuck in your community, you're unable, and with no connectivity, you're unable to work, and you're unable to access, talk to your family members and friends that are in the outside world. And then the government is unable to keep accountability of what's actually happening in your community. So connectivity is absolutely key in that space.
Yeah, and of course it sets up some pretty big fissures if we somehow become disconnected. TJ, same question to you, and maybe we'll throw into it. Has Cisco essentially become an essential business during the pandemic?
Well, I'd like to hope so. I think the same is true for Kevin's business. There's no question, that it has transformed businesses. Let's talk about some of the good that it's done, right? And the potential for change in the future. And then we'll talk about some of the challenges you asked earlier about what has changed. On the good, you're seeing banks send people to work from home in call centers, things that they thought they would never do, telling us they will never return to the in-person model. The productivity, the happiness of their employees, the feedback from their customers is off the charts. Those types of taboo norms have been broken, and there is a new paradigm. We're creating new opportunities And it's good to see that this has led to enhancements, right? And I think that's going to kind of run the table. On the more challenging side is, look, you have communities where kids are being uneducated in whole cities because a good portion of the population doesn't have access. And when you can see, Microsoft had a study where they showed that lower broadband access and usage is leads to higher unemployment. So this has an outlying effect. And I think what we're seeing is we've known a lot of this data for a heck of a long time and haven't ever truly been forced to reckon with it. And I think now you have an overwhelming need for the public sector leaders to come together with the private sector community and try to solve these problems. Not one organization is going to do that, but we've got to make sure that services are delivered in the short term, right? However they happen to do that, but you also have to have a long-term plan. This isn't going away. Prior to the pandemic, you had startups that were remote first software subscription. Think about that. They are perfectly positioned in this new paradigm to work anywhere. It's not going to be about the mayor or the governor getting that big campus to come in the future. It's going to be, my connectivity is going to be a lifeline to my economic development. So I think city services around education, healthcare become critical and are going to be re-looked at and have to be solved long term, but also in the job growth and economic development. It's important. Thankfully, being at Cisco is there. But look, we're all members of a community, and it's important for us to solve this issue.
Yeah, it is, and it's going to impact communities in a way that is significant as well. It's going to impact real estate, urban design, the way we think about density, and yet again, we've got this mandate, as you say, to keep communities together. It can't just be the technology by itself. It's got to evolve into a more stable social structure. And yeah, I think, Kevin, that's what you guys are trying to do with Viasat in Mexico, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the outcomes there. I want to do it within the context, guys, of digital equity, because if you compound the pandemic with the social justice movement that has emerged, it almost seems that digital equity has forced itself into the plan as well. And again, Kevin, why don't we start with you, because you guys, as I mentioned, are doing some groundbreaking work down in Mexico that might be a template for resolving some of the digital equity issues. And I know, TJ, you spend at least 3 hours a day on this stuff. So Kevin, why don't you go first and we can talk about this
I think
issue.
I think it's really what TJ brought up is really key, not just in the United States, but globally. And one of the reasons that satellite is playing such a big role, and there's so much talk about investment in satellite, because as we talk about getting to these communities in rural and remote areas, whether it's in the U.S. or in Mexico or globally, the cost to serve them is it's such a lower cost model to serve them with satellite, to provide them. And if you are able to invest in really, really high capacity satellites, you can provide them a lot of gigabytes for a very low price. So you get to allow them to use the internet like we would use the internet in urban centers. And what that does for education and ability to do distance learning, what it does for telemedicine, connecting these communities without having internet infrastructure in place, none of that happens. So you have this complete inequality that happens between the urban and the rural areas in each of these countries. And so what we've done in Mexico is trying to bridge that gap with this low cost solution to provide to deploy infrastructure into these communities that can be as small as a couple hundred people, and to provide them this affordable service that's actually economically sustainable both for us and for the community. And as we go globally with Viasat 3 and our footprint on Viasat 2, we're going to be able to take this model to countries around the world where we're able to actually bring up the unconnected percentage, bring them into the digital age and connect them to things like education, things like just communicating with their family and friends. And I think it's gonna, the pandemic has only exacerbated how important that is, that we do it as fast as possible.
TJ, does that sound like a solution to digital equity to you? And if
No
so,
question. Yeah,
go ahead.
I love what you had to say. I mean, look, at the end of the day, here our vision is to build an inclusive future. That's one of our corporate missions, and we share a lot of what Matt had to say on as it relates to getting access. And the reality is there's a variety of tools you use. There's not going to be one, silver bullet, right? And so just to echo what he said, that it applies in the developing markets as it does in the developed markets. We were on the phone just this morning with one of the some folks from an innovation center in the state of Virginia, and they were using satellite to solve a small, poorly populated rural area, and it was all around education, right? They without that access, these kids aren't getting education, and these problems persist. So I wholeheartely agree, and you've got to continue to apply all the solutions at your disposal, as well as you've got to continue to innovate, and then really, quite honestly, what we are beginning to see is a sea change in thinking, right? So things that prior to COVID were just the third rail, they were off limits, right? Giving access to real estate, say in a transit system, right, over in Europe as an example, and trying to basically have a shared service model across a whole host of service providers. You would have thought a world war would have to happen to make that happen. Now, everyone wants to solve this problem because, look, we all live in communities, we all have children, we're all part of families. We've got to deliver on this. And so it's just yet another sea change that we're beginning to see globally, here in the U.S. and developing world and Europe, Asia, wherever it is. These are critical services.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, TJ. It's that old thing was Dr. Johnson who said, nothing so concentrates the mind as the prospect of the noose. All that suffering has sort of fast forwarded things for us. And I agree with you, certainly with regard to education. We're doing our top 7 site visits for the year, 7 most intelligent communities, and every one of them has an incredible educational system that relies on high-speed internet. Well, let's keep on this. Suffering yields maybe some kind of redemption. From the perspective of Cisco's work, which processes have had to move quickly to adapt to the needs of communities and carriers? And maybe talk about some of the outcomes to date.
It's so I think there's been a day 1, day 2 kind of get connection, even if it's not perfect, right? So you'll see. We did see sort of the immediacy, put up a hotspot in a bus, in a library, in whatever can contribute to getting access. Now you've got communities moving into doing their own private LTE, CBRS, and trying to solve it on a broader scale, satellite, et cetera. But then what they're heading to is, okay, now before, was this issue an education issue? Was this a city issue? No, right? This is forcing them to say it's a community issue. So now they're having to sit down and say, okay, this isn't going away. I'm gonna do the best I can within the timeline I have to deliver the services that I can. But this may not be the long-term solution. So what is the long-term solution? How do I come up with a unified vision for my community that helps workforce development, that helps get educated, provide sustainability? And look, we're not talking, there are opportunities and there are challenges. Opportunities, right? So there are communities that are rural in nature and losing jobs for farming. This is a terrific opportunity to fast forward the innovation in IoT related to automate a farm, right? You're starting to see people that were kind of on the fence saying, you know what? I don't have a choice, but hey, Mr. Governor, we need help. You got to get us access out here. Please create the policies and the infrastructure that help us get access. On the flip side the other one is sustainability, as you're seeing in the wildfires. Look, they need better data to make better sustained decisions. And it's going to take a canopy of sensors that help people get better data to get out sooner, right? To understand that the wildfires are coming, their water tables are changing, right? The water quality is changing. It goes across a spectrum of issues that are the day in the life of running a city.
Yeah. Fast forwarding innovation, Kevin, big phrase there. Obviously, TJ cited a whole host of things. You can only put up one satellite, every couple of years if it's in geosynchronous orbit. You mentioned your third high throughput satellite, your high speed satellite. But is there also innovation being fast forwarded with regard to the Mexican government? I know that you guys were so successful in one part of the country that now you've moved to another part to provide the service. Has what's been accelerated from the perspective of delivering the network by satellite?
Yeah, so Lou, I'll pull on a few of those threads. So first off, on the innovation in the satellite space, just to give you an idea whether gigabits per second means much to most people, I can give you the magnitude. So when we launched Viasat-1 in 2000, I think it was 2011, the service, we launched a satellite that was in the Guinness Book of World Records. It had 140 gigabits per second. Big deal, first ultra high throughput satellite. And then from there, fast forward 7 years later, we launched Viasat-2, and that had 2x the capacity, and so 280 gigabits, 300 gigabits per second, let's say. Then Viasat-3, which we're launching next year, the first one will launch over the Americas, and that will have over a terabit per second. So if you fast forward basically over a 10-year period, we're on a logarithmic scale of growth of capacity. Obviously, usage is increased, but the technology is improving to meet that usage and go beyond it. So after that, we have a satellite launching over EMEA about 6 months later, and then over APAC shortly thereafter. So we are trying to get to the point where we can launch satellites faster. Obviously, they're a high cost investment in comparison to the LEOs, where you launch a bunch of them at a time, and the investment turns out to be high, but over a lot of satellites with much less capacity.
Right.
But when it comes to the government space, what we've seen is that not all governments have the funding to help in providing connectivity. So the need and the want to connect communities is there. And as TJ was talking about, communities connecting, seeking solutions to connect themselves. We see that in Mexico, where they will try and shoot microwave links over mountaintops or over deserts to get themselves a 1 megabit per second connection, because before that they had nothing. So they're doing whatever they can, but the resources available for these communities and for the governments really in a lot of times aren't there. So what we're seeing is that we're working with governments to allow us access to operate in these countries in order to provide the sustainable business model. So in exchange for access, we are able to go connect these unconnected and underserved communities throughout the country. And then some of the things that we can do on top of that is provide free access to government websites. In Mexico today, all of the COVID response and COVID information is all free at any of our hotspots around the country, so that people can get access to the information without having to spend any money. So that can be accelerated as we move forward, and connecting these communities and providing them access to the essential services and essential data they need.
Yeah, and that's really important, because again, what we're seeing is the ability now for satellites and the networks that Cisco enables to just gather more data on cities, so that cities are able to really take a look at what's happening in real time and then make these interventions. And of course, during a crisis, that becomes totally important. TJ, this series was designed, as you know, to start a conversation about the ways we use the intelligent community method and the concept to add innovation to the social index, not to build more networks or better cloud-based services necessarily. We think that a proper level of connectivity and access to it provides, as I said, digital vaccinations or social acupuncture to help alleviate economic and social stresses and fissures. Now, first of all, it seems like a big thing to be asking for, but we've seen it happen in places, and I just described how it could happen if more data is gathered and used properly. But it's seen as a non-tech aspect. and left to agencies like law enforcement or even religious institutions. But do you see a way for IoT, satellites that Kevin's involved with, and other hybrid elements of a highly functional network tied to a good city and community management system being part of a new ecosystem that, again, provides EMS type services to communities when there's an economic, health, or other type of crisis? Or is it just going to be left to the other
I'm
departments?
so grateful you asked the question. Look, I can't, I want to sit here and say as a technologist that technology is the hard part. It isn't, right? It'll continue to change, there's no question, but often how to design it, get it implemented, we've done it for decades, and I feel very confident we and our partners can help you achieve success. But I think this recent crisis is, I'd say it this way, if we don't solve the digital divide as a result of this crisis, we're never going to, and we probably ought to stop talking about it, right? And so what can communities do? Look, it's real simple. When you're laying down an infrastructure and you're having to pay for an infrastructure, and in the satellite business, if they only had one customer, that customer is going to pay for everything, right? So if you're doing a public safety application and you're deploying a network of whatever that connectivity is, cellular to fiber to satellite to whatever, if that's shared across all the city agencies, it's shared across the cellular providers, it's shared across, the list goes on and on and on, the costs go down, the access and affordability go up. And if you don't make that commitment to pause and stop putting out a modernization products that only solve the immediate application that you have and not in the context of the vision and policy, you will fail. You will not help your social index. And in the future, you will leave your citizens behind, because imagine if you're in an interview in the future and the first question is, you touched on one of them. Do you have space in your house to work from home? Is it quiet? What's the layout of your house? Do you have connectivity? Are the kids working from home? How much? What if table stakes in the job of the future is you got to have gig access or not? And you're a county, a city, a region that doesn't have any of those things, right? That social fabric will break. You will not have the jobs that pay for the schools. You will not have the jobs that pay for the public emergency services, right? People will move. They will not have a choice. So we've seen this movie before, whether it was forced on them because of a climate crisis of flooding or the old dust storms out in the Midwest that happened in the early days, right? They had to move as a consequence. The jobs went elsewhere, right? So we think this is somehow a new paradigm. I always like to look to the past and say, this has happened before. And
Right.
what I love about working with government is these are the people that do the really hard work that sometimes isn't a lot of fun, but is super necessary, and have to set the policies to enable a more inclusive future. And, look, I'm proud like my compadre here to help facilitate that.
Yeah, and you make some really great points there. And the primary one from my perspective is we can't avert this brain drain that goes out of places, as you just said. And this is not something new. We've been talking about building capacity, keeping our best and brightest home for a long time, and yet here we are continuously depopulating places of talent. And the rich get richer, even in this context. Kevin, I think that is specifically what Mexico was trying to avoid, what TJ was saying. And so they had a vision, a national vision, as I understand it, to provide the layers and levels of connectivity so that they wouldn't, just keep falling behind, that they wouldn't continue to lose the entrepreneurial class that might want to stay there. Do I have that about right? And B, what was the driving vision for bringing Viasat in?
So I guess we can take that into two parts. Where we talk about what's been going on in Mexico is there have been multiple programs to connect the unconnected through connecting schools and health clinics and other government offices throughout the rural area. by satellite and by other means, whether it's DSL, fiber, et cetera. And then they have an initiative where they took basically some of the TV bands that were the 700 megahertz spectrum, and they created a shared network. So I think TJ hit on it, that if everyone builds their own network and builds out their own infrastructure, then everyone loses, because your costs go through the roof, and then you end up with a lack of affordability for the solution. So one of the things that the government did is they issued a tender for the 700 megahertz spectrum to basically deploy to 93% of the population with a shared cellular network, which is called the Red Copartida. And so the company that won that bid is Alton, and they're deploying a shared network for basically MVNOs to operate on it as a way to drive down prices in the market and compete against the existing incumbents. So the Mexican government's been looking for different ways to help push forward connectivity and push forward the affordability of connectivity, especially in areas that are harder to reach or currently underserved. From our perspective, we entered the market because we saw that there were millions of people unconnected, and we saw that there was a business model that could be sustainable, that could also help change these people's lives. And the things that you see when you go to visit these communities that they're able to do now, it's really impressive. And I think the other part that we haven't really talked about is what these end users, these people. So these people are looking for the same things we are. They want a connection with their friends and family, connection, actual connection. And they want to be able to watch videos. They want to be entertained. And then they also want to do their homework, and they don't want to have to wait in line to do their homework. Right. Or, and that's a huge issue that we see in the low speed connectivity schools across the globe. You'll have a queue out the door to each person do their online homework, and then next person goes. So, I think what we looked at was, what does the end user want? They want to do everything we do. So we try and get as close to that, approximate that with what we're doing with the community internet service in Mexico, and what we're trying to launch globally.
Very good. We're running out of time here. I mean, we could continue to go on this. Guys, there are a lot of communities, cities, leaders looking at this podcast. As we sort of exit here, what would you say would be the most important network service or innovation that they should be looking for to build a post-COVID city and community that has all of the elements that we at the intelligent community say make you an intelligent community, and what you guys would say is, a good, prosperous place that accomplishes all the digital equity and related goals. TJ, start with you. What's the one thing you would be advising these folks to be looking at?
A vision and a commitment. A vision of where they want to go, or they have to go, ideally both, and a commitment to getting there, right? Combined with a plan to do so, and understanding they need to do it in a public-private partnership oriented manner. Yeah. There's no amount of money in either ledger that's going to get us there, and a commitment to innovation. But vision and commitment and a plan are so critical, and they're a lot easier for companies like Kevin and mine to work with, where they understand what they want to accomplish. And in that example on the cellular network, they knew what they wanted to do. They knew why they wanted to do that, and it brings in competition, and that's good for the community. But or it brings in the access, and that's what's good for the community.
Yeah, who should be at the table?
The most common people that are part of that is the city leadership, the economic development, the education leaders, the healthcare leaders, and the key employees, and the voices from coordinated citizen voices. That's usually the formula that puts it together. But usually the catalyst is the leader to say, hey, this is something we've got to do, and that varies based on the body, right? The structure of the community.
Yeah. If you have a mayor who says once said to me many years ago, I don't see this connection between filling my potholes and broadband, you're probably in the wrong city for the moment. Kevin, over to you for the last answer. Same question though. what should they be looking at when they're looking to satellite? Because a lot of them
Yeah.
have no idea of the capabilities of satellite, and they should.
Yeah, I think in general, what we've seen out of this is that you need to have reliable connectivity anywhere and everywhere. And like TJ was mentioning earlier, if that isn't brought forth, then you're going to have a digital divide that's going to grow over time, from education, from the workforce, from feeling left behind, just in general. So I think across the board, you look at all the technologies that are available to connect people based off of what is going to work. And so, whether it's a city or a mayor, they're going to be able to make the decisions that are going to be most cost effective, that achieve that goal, which is to connect everyone everywhere reliably. And I think private industry is doing a lot of this right now. And we need to do a better job of working with governments and to help bring this forward, because it is that important.
Just to add to that, when it comes to satellite, for example, can cities and even regions, states, provinces, whatever, do this, or does this need to go further up the political chain?
So we see it across the board. We see municipalities, jumping up and down, asking for help. We see states that have funding that are willing to invest, and then we see it at the national level. So it's across the board. The issue is that a lot of these places don't have the funding to do so. So
right.
That's where the private side has to come in, and that's where delivering the most cost-effective technology to connect people is going to be super critical.
Yeah. Just a yes or no question, because I can't get enough of you guys, but I have to end it here. Yes or no question, TJ, should connectivity in the network be thought of as a utility, or should it be thought of as a private sector opportunity?
I'm sorry, I can't answer yes or no. I think I'll say this: yes, and it should be the fourth utility, right? And if we don't start thinking about it in those terms, where parts of our communities are going to be left behind, and we probably do have to step up. I don't represent Cisco from a government policy recommendation, but certainly that's what folks are beginning to say, is that it's time for a fourth utility.
Yeah, we keep hearing that, so that's a yes. Kevin, yes or no? Utility?
It tugs at my heartstrings, but
well, that's what we wanted to do today. We wanted to tug at your heartstrings.
I'd say from our perspective, looking at the cost of deploying infrastructure and the needs for shareholder returns and whatnot, it's really a no, because if not, you're not going to get the investments across the globe that you need to really connect these people. But for my heartstrings, the more we can do between government and private to connect, that's where we need to go.
Yeah, that's just the business. Very good. Well, listen, you guys are sort of staying with the tug imagery. You guys are the tugboats for the future. You guys are bringing it into harbor, and it's exciting the way we're thinking about this. So I'm going to have to end it here. But TJ Costello and Kevin Cohen, thanks for being with us today on No Place But Home. Very much appreciate it.
Great series. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Good luck. Best of luck, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. And many thanks to the ICF Institute for their support. To attend the ICF Global Summit, visit icfsummit.com. This No Place But Home series is produced as a service to our network of intelligent communities and movement followers around the world. Shout out to our series producer, Matt Owen. To learn more about the ICF method for cities and communities, go to intelligentcommunity.org and follow us on Twitter at New Communities and Facebook. I'm Lou Zaccarella, reminding you that there really is no place like home. Take care, everybody.